It started with a scream, the kind that cuts through a peaceful Saturday morning like a rusty chainsaw through wet wood. Mark Garrison stood at his kitchen window, sipping coffee and watching birds scatter from the loud intrusion. The scream wasn't just loud, it was theatrical, panicked, and soaked in drama. His gaze dropped to the backyard where a woman in a sparkling pink blazer was clutching a drenched poodle in one arm and gesturing wildly at his pool, which was now hilariously overtaken by a swarm of inflatable dolphins bobbing up and down in synchronized chaos. Luna, the poodle in question, had clearly had enough birthday fun, judging by her waterlogged tiara and the way she shivered in the Florida sun. Neighbors peeked out from behind fences, some laughing, others filming. Mark sighed, took another slow sip of his coffee, and thought, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. 2 months earlier, Mark had finally closed on the house he had been eyeing since he left his high-stress cybersecurity job in D.C. The neighborhood looked perfect on paper: quiet streets, decent schools, a small lake nearby, and most importantly, a gorgeous backyard with a private in-ground pool. After spending a decade jumping through bureaucratic fire hoops, he was ready for something calm, something ordinary. He moved into the cul-de-sac like a man stepping into a warm bath. He waved to his neighbors, introduced himself politely, and never threw wild parties. His only indulgence was the Dolphin float, a massive blue inflatable toy he'd found in an online clearance sale and couldn't resist. It was absurd, oversized, and made him laugh every time he saw it bobbing in the water. To Mark, that dolphin was a symbol of peace. But to Karen Wilkins, it was a war crime. Mark met Karen on his 3rd day in the neighborhood. She didn't knock, just appeared in his backyard holding a clipboard and a concerned expression. She introduced herself as the HOA president and informed him, in a tone used for particularly stupid children, that inflatable toys were not in line with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Mark had looked at her, then at the dolphin, and asked if she was serious. She was. Deadly so. She even handed him a printed list of aesthetic violations with bullet points. Mark read it, chuckled, and asked if she had printed it herself. She didn't appreciate the humor. The next morning, there was an anonymous note in his mailbox suggesting he'd consider a more mature pool accessory. Despite this awkward start, Mark tried to be diplomatic. He didn't respond to the note and kept the dolphin in the pool. Weeks passed without incident until the leaf incident. Karen reappeared, arms crossed, claiming that fallen leaves from his oak tree were drifting into her yard and could attract rodents. She also mentioned that the water level in his pool was too high and could pose a hazard. Mark calmly pointed out that the trees had been there for over 30 years and that his pool wasn't connected to the Hoover Dam. Karen left, but not before muttering something about community standards and enforcement. The real tipping point came the day Mark received a hand-delivered envelope labeled Notice of Pool Evaluation. Inside was a bizarre form claiming the HOA had scheduled a visual inspection of his pool area to ensure regulatory compliance. Mark laughed out loud, thinking it was a prank. It wasn't. The form had HOA letterhead and Karen's signature. That's when he realized she wasn't just nosy, she was obsessed with control. She viewed the HOA as her kingdom and herself as queen. Mark was merely a subject who refused to kneel. Things escalated slowly but steadily. Karen would walk past his backyard 3 or 4 times a day. Sometimes she'd pause, stare at the pool like it had personally offended her, and then walk on. Once, Mark caught her trying to peek through a gap in his fence. He installed security cameras after that. The Dolphin float, now affectionately named Gary by Mark, became a symbol of quiet rebellion. He took great care of the pool, added tasteful lighting, and kept everything pristine, just to ensure she had no legal ground to stand on. Then came the weekend that changed everything. Mark had taken a short trip to visit an old friend in Orlando. He was gone for barely 48 hours. Before leaving, he locked the gate to his backyard, disabled the pool pump to save power, and informed his next-door neighbor, Doug, to keep an eye out for any odd activity. Doug, a laid-back retired Navy officer, gave him a thumbs up and said, "Don't worry, I'll shoot anyone who touches your dolphin." Mark had laughed. He shouldn't have. When he returned Sunday evening, His backyard looked like it had hosted a dog-themed Coachella. There were balloons tied to his gate, streamers in pastel colors hung across his fence, and wet paw prints on the patio tiles. In the middle of it all stood a banner stretched between two poolside chairs, "Happy Birthday Luna." Mark's jaw clenched as he opened the gate and stepped inside. There were paper plates littered across the grass, pink frosting smeared on the pavement, and the faint smell of dog treats in the air. His pool, once crystal clear, was cloudy and floating with chewed-up tennis balls. Gary, the Dolphin float, was shoved upside down in the deep end like a drowned victim of Karen's party revolution. Mark didn't say a word. He walked through the scene, took photos of everything, and went inside. A small envelope was taped to his door. "Thanks for letting us use your amazing pool. Luna had a blast. Karen." There was a smiley face sticker at the bottom and a bone-shaped confetti piece stuck inside the envelope. Mark read it twice, stunned at the audacity. She hadn't even asked. She hadn't even pretended to ask. She had broken into his yard and thrown a party for a dog. That night, Mark sat at his desk and reviewed every HOA document he'd received. He double-checked his property deed. He printed out Florida trespassing laws and pool ownership statutes. The next morning, he went straight to the county records office. By noon, he had undeniable proof. His backyard was fully private property, exempt from shared access rules. The HOA had no jurisdiction over his pool whatsoever. Mark didn't get angry. He got focused. Because when someone drenches your Dolphin, hosts a dog party in your pool, and thanks you with a glitter sticker, you don't yell. You plan. And Mark was very, very good at planning. The next morning came with the kind of Florida sunshine that tried its best to be forgiving, but even the bright sky couldn't melt the fury building up in Mark's chest. He stood at the edge of his pool, hands on hips, surveying the wreckage left behind. Soggy pink streamers clung to the fence like seaweed on a pier. Dozens of half-deflated balloons drifted lazily across the water. Luna's birthday had apparently involved a whole pack of dogs, judging by the paw prints stamped into his concrete patio like an archaeological site of madness. Someone had even left behind a chew toy shaped like a champagne bottle. Gary, the beloved Dolphin float, was still upside down, wedged awkwardly in the corner of the deep end like a forgotten relic of resistance. Mark pulled him out slowly, righted him with care, and muttered, "They are not going to get away with this." He didn't have to wait long to confirm that the event wasn't just a one-time lapse in judgment. Around noon, the sound of flip-flops scraping gravel announced Karen's approach. She didn't knock. Instead, she strutted into his driveway with an energy that could only be described as entitled royalty. She was holding a gift bag in one hand and what appeared to be a framed photo in the other. Mark didn't move from where he stood on the porch. She waved as if yesterday's intrusion had been a delightful surprise party for him too. "Mark," she called, beaming like a pageant winner. "Wasn't it just wonderful? Luna had the best time. Everyone loved your pool." He didn't answer. She took that as an invitation to walk closer. "I brought you a thank you gift," she said, placing the bag at the foot of his porch steps. "And a picture from the party. Look how happy Luna was." She held up the frame. It showed Luna mid-jump into his pool, wearing a tiny pink tutu. In the background were several women in swimsuits and floppy hats holding tiny dogs and sipping mimosas. Mark could see the exact moment the chaos had been captured. His backyard, his furniture, and even his personalized grill cover were all in the photo. "You know you broke into my yard, right?" he said finally, his voice low, careful. Karen blinked like the concept hadn't even occurred to her. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. It was for the community. You weren't even here." "That's because I was on a private trip, and you're not supposed to be here whether I am or not." "Well," she shrugged, brushing something invisible off her sequined sleeve, "the HOA has discretionary rights when it comes to shared community assets. The pool is listed as recreational space in the charter. I assumed it applied." Mark narrowed his eyes. "You assumed wrong." She smiled again, too quickly, and waved it off. Honestly, everyone was thrilled. You should have seen the comments on the Facebook group. We're even thinking of making it a monthly thing. Community dog swims. Maybe even obedience classes by the pool. It's such a wasted space otherwise. Mark stood still, staring at her, heart rate steady, expression unreadable. He was learning that people like Karen didn't understand confrontation unless it was served in the exact format they understood: documents, consequences, humiliation. Words wouldn't do it. Calm logic wouldn't touch her. She would need a lesson, not a lecture. You do realize this is my private property, right? He said again, this time emphasizing each syllable. The pool. The yard. The furniture. None of it is covered by the HOA charter. I checked with the county records. Karen scoffed. That can't be. I've been on the board for 8 years. We know every property line in this subdivision. Then you should read again. My lot was purchased before the HOA absorbed the surrounding development. It's exempt. That pool is mine. Not yours. Not the community's. Just mine. For a split second, something flickered in Karen's face. A hint of confusion. Maybe even embarrassment. But she masked it quickly with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, I mean, that's fine, Mark. You don't have to be so territorial. We're all neighbors here. He stepped down the porch slowly, not menacing but firm. You climbed over my gate. You threw a party. You let animals into my water system. You damaged my filters and left garbage everywhere. That's not being neighborly. She took a small step back, the first real sign that her facade was cracking. It was just one afternoon, she said more quietly. No harm done. You trespassed, he replied. That's harm. That's illegal. Her eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? No, he said plainly. I'm warning you. There's a difference. And I'm giving you one chance to make this right. Karen looked down at the thank you gift bag, then back at him. She didn't say another word. Just turned around and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement with forced confidence. Mark didn't even bother opening the gift. He tossed it in the trash and went back inside. Over the next 2 days, he cleaned his pool from top to bottom. Replaced the filters, skimmed the confetti, and rebalanced the chemicals. He disinfected every float, every chair, and even scrubbed the dog prints off his deck with a power washer. By the 3rd day, the pool was sparkling again. Gary the Dolphin floated happily at his usual corner, and the patio furniture was returned to its organized glory. Then came the second violation. Mark woke up that Saturday to barking, dozens of them, high-pitched and unrelenting. He looked outside and saw a familiar crowd gathering near his gate. Folding chairs, dog leashes, coolers, even a portable speaker playing upbeat music. Karen was back, this time with reinforcements. She had printed flyers and handed them out the day before. Dog Swim Saturday, hosted by your friendly HOA. Except it wasn't hosted by the HOA. And it certainly wasn't friendly. Mark stayed inside and watched as people climbed the gate again, one woman using a step ladder and passing her pug over the top to another woman inside. Karen waved cheerily to her guests as if she was hosting a neighborhood brunch. Mark smiled to himself. He didn't interfere. Not yet. He grabbed his phone, checked the security footage, saved the clips, and uploaded them to a private folder. Then he opened his notes app and typed one sentence. It's time. He didn't have to yell, scream, or make a scene. He just had to wait. Because if Karen thought the first party was going to go unanswered, she had another thing coming. Mark wasn't the kind of man who got mad. He was the kind who got even. And this time, he was going to do it with style. And 50 inflatable dolphins. The morning after the second invasion, Mark walked into his backyard with a trash bag in one hand and his phone in the other. The sight that greeted him was somehow worse than the first. Wet paw prints once again smeared the tiles, someone had clearly let their dog relieve itself near his garden hose, and several cupcake wrappers floated in the shallow end like sad boats after a storm. Gary the Dolphin had been moved aside, tethered to a chair with what looked like a pink leash. Mark silently collected the mess, documenting each piece of trash with a photo. He wasn't even angry anymore. What he felt was colder, more focused, like someone switching from defense to offense in a game they now intended to win. Karen had crossed every line, and now it was his turn to show her what that cost. He spent the rest of the morning deep cleaning the pool again. This time, he didn't just skim the water, he vacuumed the bottom, drained the pump housing, refilled the chlorine feeder, and replaced 2 cracked tiles that one of the dogs had likely chipped. Then he sat down at his outdoor table, opened his laptop, and started researching. He wasn't interested in HOA bylaws anymore. He had already confirmed that his property was exempt. What he wanted now was clarity on legal escalation. He looked up local trespassing laws, small claims procedures, and property damage documentation. He didn't plan on calling the police again unless he had the evidence to make sure they couldn't ignore him. He downloaded a trespass affidavit form from the Sheriff's Department website and printed it. He made sure it was notarized by the end of the day. He also bought 4 additional motion-activated security cameras and installed them around the perimeter of his yard. But legal steps weren't going to be enough. People like Karen didn't fear fines or letters. They feared public humiliation. They feared becoming the punchline instead of the judge. So while Mark was organizing documents and camera footage, he was also planning something much more theatrical. It started when he stumbled upon a liquidation sale for pool toys. A nearby water park had closed permanently and was auctioning off hundreds of inflatables, lounges, and novelty items. Among them were exactly what he needed: 50 enormous inflatable dolphins, each over 6 feet long, complete with squeaky noisemakers and cartoon grins. Mark bought the entire lot. The delivery came in 2 large trucks the following week. The driver helped him unload them into his garage, confused but amused. Mark offered no explanation. He spent the next few days inspecting and inflating each dolphin, testing their buoyancy in the pool, then deflating them and stacking them carefully. He devised a method to tether them underwater with retractable fishing lines attached to weighted clips. A single pull of a release cord would unleash all 50 dolphins at once, shooting them to the surface in an absurd explosion of chaos. It took him 4 days to rig the system beneath the pool's ledge. He didn't stop until every one of the inflatable creatures was in place, hidden beneath a blue tarp he laid across the surface, anchored at the corners to make it look like the pool was simply covered for maintenance. During this time, Karen continued acting like nothing was wrong. She sent another note through his mailbox, this one printed with dog paw designs and a friendly reminder that Dog Swim Day was such a success. "See you next week." Mark didn't respond. He didn't need to. The neighborhood Facebook group was already lighting up with photos from the last gathering: Luna in her tutu, dogs splashing, people sipping drinks in his backyard like it was a public park. Karen had even posted an event notice: Surprise Dog Day. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Bring your pups. That was the day Mark had circled on his calendar. He continued preparing like it was a military operation. He rehearsed the dolphin release mechanism 5 times to ensure nothing would go wrong. He updated his security cameras to upload directly to a cloud backup every 5 minutes. He printed signs saying private property, entry prohibited, and zip-tied them to his gate, knowing Karen would ignore them but needing the legal cover. He even placed a small Bluetooth speaker near his porch connected to a motion sensor that would automatically play an audio recording whenever someone crossed the invisible line. The message was short and direct: "You are trespassing on private property. You are being recorded. Leave now." Friday night came, and Mark barely slept. Not because of nerves, but because of anticipation. He cleaned the yard again, double-checked the release cords, and ensured Gary was safely tucked away out of sight. At exactly 6 a.m. Saturday morning, he poured himself a cup of coffee, put on a pair of aviator sunglasses, and sat down on his porch swing to wait. They came like clockwork. By 9:45, Karen's familiar voice echoed down the cul-de-sac, barking cheerful greetings. By 10, the gate had been pried open, she had someone loosen the latch, and the crowd of dog owners began pouring in again. There were more this time. At least 30 people and 24 dogs, ranging from yapping chihuahuas to a slobbering golden retriever that immediately ran to the pool tarp and began barking. Karen walked in behind them, holding Luna high in her arms like she was royalty. Mark didn't say a word. He simply waited until she reached the edge of the pool. Then, with perfect timing, the golden retriever bounded onto the torp and began clawing at it. Karen stepped forward to stop him just as the retractable clips released. Mark reached into his pocket, pulled the cord, and gave it one solid yank. The pool exploded. 50 dolphins shot to the surface all at once, launching the torp into the air like a parachute. The noise was immediate: squeaks, splashes, the shrieks of startled dogs, and gasps from their owners. The dolphins filled the water completely, leaving no room for anyone or anything to swim. One bounced into a woman's leg, another squealed as it flipped and smacked the surface. Several dogs panicked and began barking uncontrollably, trying to leap back out of the pool. Karen stumbled backward in shock, lost her footing, and fell directly into the water, Luna yelping and clawing at her arm as they splashed down together. Mark stood from his porch swing, slow and silent. The Bluetooth speaker activated as someone tripped the sensor again. His pre-recorded voice echoed across the yard: "You are trespassing on private property. You are being recorded. Leave now." People began backing away, some laughing nervously, others shouting in confusion. Karen emerged from the pool gasping, her hair soaked, mascara streaking down her cheeks, holding a dripping Luna like a lifeline. Her sequined shirt was clinging to her like seaweed. The crowd parted as Mark walked to the edge of the patio, holding his phone up to record. "I told you," he said calmly, "not to come back here." Karen stammered something about community access and emergency. Mark turned the camera toward her, catching her sputtering for excuses, then slowly panned across the yard to show the dolphins, the signs, and the shocked crowd. "You brought this on yourself," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And now it's time the rest of the neighborhood sees what trespassing really looks like." Then he hit Go Live. The moment Mark hit the Go Live button, the internet did the rest. Within seconds, the live stream began picking up traction. Comments started to roll in from his modest but growing group of followers, most of whom had joined after his last few HOA run-ins had made their way into online community forums. He didn't say anything dramatic, he didn't need to. The visual said it all. Dozens of dolphin floats dominated the pool, bobbing and squeaking like mischievous sea creatures. A crowd of dog owners looked confused, embarrassed, and more than a few were already making their way out the same way they came in. The camera stayed steady as Karen flailed in the water, trying to keep Luna's soaked poodle head above the chaos of inflatable fins. From the side, someone tried to help her out, slipping and nearly falling into the pool themselves. Mark's voice, calm and clear, finally cut through the sound. He narrated the scene like a nature documentary, his tone dry and unimpressed. "Here we have the wild HOA leader in her natural habitat," he said, zooming in slightly on Karen struggling to untangle herself from a particularly stubborn float. "She's invaded foreign territory without permission and now faces the majestic defense of the dolphin tribe." The comments section exploded with laughing emojis and real-time reactions. Viewers were already tagging others, telling them to tune in. Someone wrote, "I'd pay for popcorn just to watch this unfold." Another wrote, "Karen's reign ends here. Dolphin justice is real." Karen finally made it to the edge of the pool, coughing, holding Luna who had ditched the tiara somewhere mid-dive. Her sparkling clothes were no longer sparkling but clinging to her like a second, shame-soaked skin. She looked up and saw Mark still calmly recording, his phone never shaking, his expression unreadable. For a second, her mouth opened like she was going to speak, but nothing came out. Then her eyes locked onto his. Gone was the fake neighborhood charm. All that was left was rage. "You humiliated me," she screamed, voice cracking as she stood dripping by the pool's edge. "You planned this." "Yes," Mark answered plainly. "I warned you not to come back. You chose to ignore that." Then he slowly turned the camera toward the clear, private property, no entry signs attached to his gate. "Just for the record, everyone, those signs have been there for days." They walked past them. Deliberately. Someone near the back tried to lighten the tension with a laugh, but it only made things worse for Karen. Her gaze snapped toward her guests, many of whom were now quietly collecting their things and trying to pretend they hadn't been part of this fiasco. A woman with a Maltese dog muttered an apology as she stepped away. A man with a bulldog nodded to Mark awkwardly before hurrying after her. The crowd was unraveling fast, shame and confusion taking the place of entitlement. Karen's voice rose again, desperate and erratic. "You can't just trap people like this. This is abuse." Mark didn't blink. "Abuse? You broke into my property. Twice. I simply gave you a reason not to come back a third time. No dogs were hurt. The pool is mine. And this," he waved a hand toward the dolphins. "This is what a boundary looks like." Karen trembled, her face burning red, but she couldn't form a coherent sentence. Instead, she turned around and stormed out, shoes squelching on the pavement, Luna still dripping and miserable in her arms. Mark kept recording as she shoved through the gate, barking orders at nobody in particular and shouting something about lawsuits. The remaining guests slowly trickled out in silence, a few casting backward glances at the pool now filled with squeaky dolphin sentinels floating proudly in formation. Gary, the original float, sat at the front like a general watching over the victory. As the yacht emptied, Mark ended the live stream. He immediately saved the footage to multiple devices and backed it up online. The response was explosive. Within the hour, the video had been reshared to multiple HOA forums and local drama groups. Comments poured in with everything from disbelief to admiration. "This is how you handle entitled people," one wrote. "Dude's a legend," another said. Even people who didn't know Mark were rooting for him now. His inbox was flooded with requests for interviews, local podcast features, and even a message from someone claiming to work for a reality TV network. But Mark wasn't chasing fame. He just wanted peace. And part of that peace meant handling things by the book now that public opinion was firmly on his side. Later that afternoon, a police cruiser pulled up to his driveway. Mark greeted the officers with a folder in hand. Inside were printed photos of the trespassers, screenshots from the Facebook event Karen had posted, copies of the deed showing his property's exclusion from HOA jurisdiction, and the signed trespass affidavit. The officer barely had to ask questions. Everything was organized, legally sound, and undeniable. The video footage alone was enough to warrant a formal complaint. The officer nodded, took down a few more notes, and promised they'd be following up with Karen. Mark didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. The battle was over, and the result was obvious to everyone. What came next was just cleanup and formality. By Monday, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. Karen tried to defend herself, blaming miscommunication and unclear boundaries, but it was no use. The footage was public. The neighborhood was furious. Property owners who had once stayed silent now demanded her resignation. She was removed from her position with a majority vote and replaced by a retired schoolteacher named Diane who had never been involved in any of the previous nonsense. Diane personally stopped by Mark's house 2 days later with a written apology on behalf of the HOA and a signed agreement to respect all property lines moving forward. She also brought cookies. Mark accepted the letter, declined the cookies, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The dolphins stayed in the pool for another 3 days. Mark inflated a few extra just for fun and even gave some of them names. Kids from neighboring houses would peek through the fence and laugh at the sight. One little boy said it looked like a water parade. Mark nodded and said, "That's exactly what it is. A victory parade." In the evenings, he would sit on his porch, sip tea, and watch the sunlight bounce off the cartoon faces of his inflatable army. He had no intention of making enemies. But he had learned that sometimes, peace had to be enforced, not with anger, but with creativity, patience, and a little bit of squeaky vengeance. The neighborhood settled down. Karen stopped showing her face. And the pool finally returned to what it had been all along, his sanctuary, his space, and the one place where floating dolphins meant more than just fun. They meant freedom. Mark didn't need to say anything more to anyone. The message was already loud and clear. This was not just a pool. It was a boundary. And now, everyone finally understood it. It was just past 7 in the morning when Mark heard the quiet knock on his door. The neighborhood had returned to its usual calm after the chaos of Karen's failed pool conquest. He opened the door and found Officer Delgado standing there with a relaxed posture and a faint grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Mark greeted him with a nod and gestured for him to come in. The officer declined politely but got straight to the point. Karen had officially been served with a citation for trespassing, and a civil complaint was in motion regarding the property damage. The complaint included documented repair costs to Mark's pool filter system, fence latch, and cleaning charges from both events. She hadn't taken the news well. According to Delgado, she had accused Mark of running a smear campaign, but the video footage and signed witness statements made her protests irrelevant. She had lost control, and the law didn't work on favoritism the way the HOA board once did. Mark thanked the officer, shook his hand, and watched him drive away. For the first time in weeks, he exhaled fully, a breath he didn't realize he had been holding since the first time Karen marched into his yard with her clipboard and condescending smile. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about the restoration of order, the return of boundaries. He knew that the real power lay not in the spectacle of floating dolphins or viral videos, but in the quiet enforcement of consequences. There would be no third invasion, no more fake events posted online, no more sarcastic thank you notes taped to his door. The message had been delivered, and this time it stuck. Later that week, Mark received an envelope in his mailbox that didn't carry the HOA logo or the cheap dog-themed stationery Karen had favored. It was from the county courthouse, a copy of the no-contact order filed by his lawyer and accepted by a local judge. It barred Karen from entering his property, speaking to him in person, or attempting to stage any public events that involved his residence in any way. Violations would carry fines and potential escalation. Mark filed the paper away carefully in a labeled folder alongside all the others. It was done. Not just socially, not just morally. Legally done. He stepped into his backyard, the morning sun casting reflections on the freshly cleaned surface of his pool. The dolphins had been deflated the day before and packed into storage, except for Gary. Gary floated gently in the shallow end, forever a reminder of how the strangest things could become the most powerful symbols. The patio was spotless, the plants freshly watered, and the new security lights blinked subtly at the corners of the yard. Everything was how it should have been from the start, his, peaceful, untouched. A knock on the fence interrupted the silence. It wasn't aggressive or sneaky. It was soft, tentative. Mark walked over and saw Doug, his next-door neighbor, standing on the other side with a thermos in one hand and 2 mugs in the other. Doug, who had witnessed much of the madness, offered a sheepish smile and said, "Mind if I sit a spell?" Mark opened the gate and let him in. They sat on the patio in quiet company, sipping coffee. Doug finally broke the silence with a chuckle. "You know, my wife said you're either crazy or brilliant." "Maybe both," Mark said, deadpan, before allowing himself a laugh. Doug joined him. "People are talking," Doug continued. "They say what you did. No one's ever put her in her place like that before. Not in all the years she's ruled that board." Mark shook his head. "I wasn't trying to start a movement. I just wanted to be left alone." "Well, you started something anyway. The new HOA president, Diane, she came by last night. She's talking about rewriting the HOA charter, making clearer distinctions between private and shared property. They're trying to clean up the mess Karen left behind." Mark raised an eyebrow, surprised but not displeased. That'd be a first. Doug leaned back, letting the warmth of the sun hit his face. "You gave people a story. You showed them you don't have to scream or fight dirty to win. Just be smart, be patient. That's rare around here." Mark looked at the water, then back at Doug. "I'm just glad it's over." A few days later, Mark received another unexpected visit. This time it was a teenage boy from down the street who shyly asked if he could take a few pictures near the pool for a school photography assignment. His teacher had seen the viral video and jokingly assigned the class a project called Neighborhood Legends. Mark allowed it, and the boy came back the next day with his camera and a notepad. He asked questions like, "What made you choose dolphins?" and "Were you nervous when you went live?" Mark answered honestly, saying he wasn't trying to be famous, he just didn't want to be invaded again. The boy thanked him and left with a smile. By the end of the month, things had changed in subtle but noticeable ways. Karen's house was up for sale. Rumor was she had taken a job in another city and needed a fresh start. Few seemed sorry to see her go. The new HOA leadership was less intrusive, more focused on actual community improvement rather than micromanagement. People seemed to smile more during walks, and Mark found himself invited to barbecues and book clubs he had no intention of joining, but appreciated all the same. He spent more time in his backyard again, not out of vigilance but comfort. The space felt like his sanctuary once more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, he lit a few citronella candles, pulled out Gary the dolphin, and floated in the pool for the first time in weeks. There were no dogs barking, no unsolicited guests, no glitter explosions, just the sound of water, wind, and the distant murmur of peaceful neighbors. As he drifted gently, the stars beginning to blink into view overhead, he thought about everything that had happened. The trespassing, the arguments, the ridiculous pool party, the dolphins, the live stream. It all felt surreal now, like a wild chapter in an otherwise quiet book. But he wouldn't forget it. He'd learned that sometimes, no matter how ridiculous a situation became, standing your ground with creativity and precision could win battles brute force never could. And sometimes, just sometimes, inflatable dolphins could be the best form of defense a man could ask for. With a small grin, he floated a little longer, arms outstretched, the water lapping gently against his sides. Somewhere in the quiet night, a neighbor's wind chime sang softly, and Mark thought, finally, the war was over. The peace he had moved here for was no longer a dream. It was real. And it was his.